See,
Because I said so.
Or
it's not
is this
real.
fantasy?
None of this is real.
Well, we're broadcasting live, so
It's no escape from reality.
this is what I put up with, folks.
The views and opinions expressed by the guests of Sasquatch Experience do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the hosts, sponsors, or affiliates of the Sasquatch Experience. As always, listener discretion is advised.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Does a legend walk among us, lurking in the forests of our world?
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something. Looks like a man. I don't know what it was.
For over 15 years, we've talked with scientists, researchers, investigators, and witnesses, trying to gain insight and proof around the existence of this mysterious entity.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Zia,
Hello?
get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Join us as we continue into the investigation of the Sasquatch Experience. And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sasquatch Experience, Monday night, January 24th, 2022. And guys, it's great to be back, but we're back on a sad note this week. Actually, last week as well, as we lost our good friend, Butch Wachowski. This one's going to take some time to get over, guys. We lose friends, more often than not than we'd like to admit. Lately happening more, though, than we'd like. And without trying to get overly emotional, because I still have moments, sad to, report that Butch Wachowski did, pass away. And we're going to miss him. He's a good friend of the show, good broadcast partner to you and I, Vance, as we were over on The Existence of Strange Things on Radio Memphis, as we were on Arcane Radio together for a little while. It's not going to be the same without Butch. I'm going to miss him. A surrogate grandfather to me. He's just a good guy, and I will miss
Sweet
his
man.
presence. Yeah, it could be a pain in the ass too. I tell everybody Butch had a BA and BS. The man could talk like nobody's
I know.
business.
I know.
And you're talking to a guy that's got a doctorate
No.
in conversation, so I'm just going to miss him.
We could probably do 3 shows just on Butch himself, but
Yeah, absolutely.
that is. We'll share some of those points from time to time throughout shows, I'm sure. But
Absolutely. Most
yes,
important
he
thing
will
about
be,
keeping somebody
Godspeed,
around
Butch.
is got to remember them, right? That's how you keep people alive, is through memory and stories. And this Friday night, I'll be doing Arcane Radio before it becomes Phantoms and Monsters Radio with Lon Strickler. Be doing a Butch Wachowski tribute show. And then next Monday, following Sasquatch Experience, a couple hours later, I'll be joining David Scott on Spaced Out Radio. We'll be doing another show on Butch Wachowski. So, good, plenty of Butch stories there, guys. We're not going to go on to about it because I don't want to get all emotional, and I'm already stumbling over my words, and we'll just move on to other things. But as you can see down in the little corner, in memory of our good friend Butch, hell of a guy, gentlemen, hell of a guy.
Yes, he was. Absolutely. And still is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but talking about things besides Butch that were still also a pain in the ass, Vance, you and I are editing some episodes for Sasquatch Experience Classic. So if we have to miss a week or just even exclusivities for our Patreons, this Blog Talk Radio audio that we have is difficult to play with.
To say the least.
I spent 4 to 5 hours today editing the Bindernagel show, and I've gotten like 43 solid minutes of good. I I don't want to say good, of decent audio that I'm comfortable putting out there for folks. But I guess it's better than nothing, right?
Right.
And we are
No,
working
and the
hard.
content is still golden because it's
Yeah.
Bindernagel, and he's always been a close to the vest personal favorite of mine. So.
Well, and it's not like, sadly, you're going to be able to interview him anymore either. We talk about, losing friends, and, in this field, a lot of the forebears and the academics, slowly but surely we lose them too. So whatever things we have to preserve them, we're fortunate where Henry and I and some of our friends in the past were able to go back and, and James, and have some of these interviews with folks we're just not going to have that privilege of doing anymore.
I miss the general conversations. Just,
Yeah,
over a
absolutely.
burger or something. Hey, how's it going?
Right.
But so we are going to be bringing the Bindernagel episode to our Patreons first. Then, of course, we'll release that to the traditional listeners through through Spotify. Folks seem to be digging Spotify as a place to listen to us. We appreciate your support. Rate us and review us wherever you listen. We appreciate it. Helps get the numbers up. Help gets us out into the spotlight. More advertisers besides just Dr. Squatch. But we love Dr. Squatch soap.
Do love that Squatch.
Yes, you do. But I'm sure you all didn't hear in to listen to our pain points and our sadness. You all tuned in tonight to listen to stories of the Nantinaq, the mystery primate, maybe supernatural in origin, being up in Portlock, Alaska, Port Chatham, Alaska. This thing's getting around, buddy. And, it was funny. Years ago, I told you that Alaska was going to be a hot spot at some point because nobody's been going up there. Besides Ken Gerhardt, and they did the couple shows. Jax, I interviewed them back on Test, Missing in Alaska, right? And I said, this is going to be a hot spot at some point. But as you and I were talking offline, Vance, there's not a lot of sighting reports and databases to kind of support the activity that they talk about in these coastal villages. And that's interesting to me, that there's not a lot of data back up these incredible stories that we're hearing. There's Alaskan Killer Bigfoot on television on Discovery Plus now. A couple documentaries coming out. We're going to talk about them in just a little bit. But, give you guys a little chance to opine on this subject before we get into some meat and potatoes.
Well, I mean, the entire scope of what happened or what has happened in Portlock and Port Chatham, it's still one of my favorite mysteries. And I'm still learning more and more and more. But the more I learn about those two locations, the more of a mystery it becomes and the more enthralled I become. And I'm almost to the point where I'm like, you know what, pack bags, let's go. And let's see what's actually there, because the physical evidence that has been left behind by the community that did settle there and the history behind what had happened there, whether it's legend, lore, or actual fact, it's still very mystical why this entire region just vanished so suddenly. Just pack bags and get the hell out of there. So something happened, and I know that's what we're trying to nail down here. I don't think we'll nail it down in this show, but we'll certainly throw out a lot of facts as to possibilities as to what happened.
Well, I think we look at, Sasquatch being the culprit because that's what the narrative is right now. But, talking offline to a couple other individuals, our executive producer, Brian Corbin, has a theory that perhaps it was the chromium mining that led to the departure because of poisoning into the food supply, the water supply, a rational.
Right.
I'm not. Here we are doing a Bigfoot show, and I just said the word rational as implying that Sasquatch isn't a rational reason for why they're leaving this community. But maybe that's the incorrect term. Maybe the term I'm looking for is a plausible reasoning as to why these towns were just abandoned.
Or provable.
Or provable.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. No, that's a good point.
Henry, what are your thoughts?
Well, the Nantinaq is an interesting creature. I mean, it may be supernatural in origin, as you mentioned, and it did get around. I mean, I don't think Portlock and Port Chatham were that far from each other, but still,
16 miles, I think.
Right.
that's not very far.
No,
A
no, it's not.
A Sasquatch could traverse that pretty easily.
But, we have to talk about the fact that it's not just one, right? Or is it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it more than one? We don't know. Because the stories are just, you try to reconcile Nantinaq being a physical being, and then so many of the things they're talking about in the show, Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, being very supernatural and spiritual, right? I had a lot of problems with the show, not because of the production value. The production value is not bad. But one of the things that really irks me is that, a couple of the participants are supposed to be diehard, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and you bring a psychics in. First of all, the church isn't gonna that doesn't that doesn't reconcile. That doesn't jive with one another. Like, that's a big faux pas. You wouldn't be bringing in psychics or anything of the kind of occult nature into something that you've just sat and had a prayer of protection and everything else done for you.
Yeah.
I know this as somebody who's Eastern Orthodox, right? Somebody that's been in the faith. So they just don't jive. That's got to be an executive producer decision or a producer decision. I don't see that being part of Keith or anyone else on the show, because that would just be, if you're looking at this and, you go through all that spiritual protection, you've just obliterated everything. Plus, the church won't be happy with you when you come back. That could be a couple penance or confessions before you can get back into communion. So that wouldn't be a good thing. And I know this isn't a religious show, and I'm not trying to force that on anybody. I'm just saying from, to add that realism to the show, like it wouldn't be, right off the bat, I'm calling bullshit.
Right.
For
Well,
television value.
The only thing is, I mean, you have to think that maybe in some of their religious experience, they might think that they're dealing with a demon rather than some sort of flesh and blood entity.
Yeah, but you still wouldn't be bringing a psychic in.
Yeah.
You'd be bringing in a priest. You wouldn't be bringing in a psychic.
True.
And actually, I don't really, I don't know, Polly wasn't very compelling or engaging to me. There wasn't anything psychic that she brought out that you couldn't ascertain from a conversation you had with the gentleman they talked to that had some of the knowledge of the Spanish settlers in the Portlock area.
Well, a good portion of the psychic community is that. Like, they're just really good detectives.
Yeah.
My brother lost his job and his wife, and he called a psychic at $60 an hour, and he's like, she told him all these positive things, and I was like, yeah, I could have told you all that stuff last week, and I know, and he goes, well, how would she know that? I'm like, because you gave her enough information, she could Google you,
Yeah, yeah, it's true. They do what do they call that? Not cold read. They call it something. They read from you, not just the.
You had a relative. They had an H in.
You give them. You feed them.
Name. Oh wait, no, an R. Yes, R. Yes. Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we got Henry Sealing and we got Vance, who dropped off the face of the earth. So we'll keep going here.
I guess it's
James.
just you and me.
No, Vance is back. Thank God. Anyhow.
It's a blizzard here.
Henry, did you fall over?
Yeah.
Help, he's falling.
He's all right.
Please tell me that's an arm.
So anyhow, Vance, before you dropped off, my
cat needs to be fed. My cat needs to be fed.
I'm so glad we had hours before the show.
I had that conversation.
Anyhow, so Vance, before we were talking about Henry's cat and Baker, we were talking about the psychic, right? And just gonna hit the mute button on him just real quick till he's finished. All right. About how a lot of that information they pull from you. They're not really getting anything new or compelling.
Right.
It's just all part of the shtick, right? And she wasn't compelling to me much on the program. And I don't think it adds to the mystery of the show.
No, I agree with you. You know, and there's a couple extra points that I would add into that kind of steps outside the boundaries of the whole psychic thing. And just take a look at what may have happened in that area in a more realistic sense. Not saying that it's not a Bigfoot type of creature, but in a lot of the accounts that happened in this area, this was an 8-foot tall, hair covered creature that had claws.
Yeah.
And I've always found that completely fascinating because in a lot of the Sasquatch reports, you don't get claws as
No.
part of the top tier of a description. So I started researching a little bit more, and I'm looking at the area rather closely. Now, south of Portlock is Kodiak Island that sits on the Gulf of Alaska. So I did a little bit of research. I've known this for a period of time, but I did a little bit more research just so I'd have my facts straight. The island of Kodiak is where the brown Kodiak is very famous for. It's really the only region which the Kodiak brown bear lives.
Right.
The difference between the Kodiak and the grizzly is that the fact that the Kodiak lives inland and it is a big game hunter, which makes it far more aggressive to take down the black-tailed deer and other large big game prey. So it is very aggressive. Now, bears will stand on their hind legs and pounce their prey. That is very typical. Grizzlies usually will stay on the outskirts of Kodiak Island and throughout other parts of Alaska on the waterways. And their primary food source is fish and aquatic life. So the Kodiak, by hunting larger prey, substantially makes it a larger bear. Not by huge numbers, but it does make it a larger and far more aggressive bear. So I'm thinking, well, what if you had cold winters in the 1950s where there's the ice sheet across the Gulf of Alaska where the Kodiak crossed over the ice sheet? Now, I understand that bears do about 90 days of hibernation over the winter season. But you may have had a Kodiak on an ice sheet travel to Portlock. It's very possible. Now, when it is in an aggressive mood, it is hunting larger prey. And what's a larger prey? Would be a person. It would stand on its hind legs, and they have massive claws. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a Bigfoot involved in any of this. I think there's very big possibility that maybe there was, a competitive food source and competitive fighting maybe between both of them. And it all goes back to who would win a fight between, a Bigfoot and a grizzly bear or a Kodiak bear. I would still always, throw my dime towards a Bigfoot because it has an opposable thumb and makes it a little bit more agile in a fighting stance. But nonetheless, maybe the Kodiak was referred to because in a lot of cultures, when there is a creature that is rogue, it usually gets named, whether it be a big alligator known as Al. The culture or the society in that region will name the thing because it's an unusual, dominant, and has an aggressive nature about it, and they'll name it so that people understand what it is that you're talking about. And it could very well be Nantinaq was named for a Kodiak, but I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying maybe some of the reports, because I found it fascinating that so many witness descriptions describe this thing as 8 foot tall with claws.
Yeah,
now, a Kodiak standing on its hind legs will be about 8 feet tall. One other point, and then Sean, I'll give the floor back to you. One other point is there's been a lot, I won't say a lot, but there is a number of reports of sightings of what is known as the short-faced bear, which was thought to have gone extinct between 11 and 10,000 years ago. The short-faced bear has a much shorter snout than typical bears today. The polar bear, the brown bear, all the brown bears, which is grizzly and Kodiak, has a much shorter snout, but it stood on its hind legs between 13 and 15 feet tall as a full-grown adult. That's massive. And
That's
it
a
was
huge
the
bear.
largest bear to ever walk the face of the earth, and they were fossil found in North America. Well, it's possible maybe this thing is still around too, because I found it amazing that, or not amazing, but I found it coincidental that Gigantopithecus blackie and the short-faced bear both went extinct in the same time frame.
Well, they say the short-faced bear may have been around up to as soon as 11,000 years ago.
Right.
So it actually would have been after Gigantopithecus too. Like it didn't phase out at the same
No,
time.
but in the
it's
same
still,
in the same genre and same.
but
time
they
period.
did exist in the same time period,
Right.
though. To your point,
Right.
make sure you Google a short-faced bear too, not shit-faced
Yeah.
bears, which also brought up some very interesting Google points.
Is that Berenstain or Berenstein?
Yeah.
No, but as we were talking about, you make to the point to this, 8-foot creature with the claws, right? You start adding supernatural elements to it. It only comes out in the fog. Well, you're in a bay. It gets pretty foggy in the bay. How often
Right.
are you going to have fog
Right.
in this area? So you start attributing, the physical with the, environmental. Now all of a sudden you've got the makings for a hell of a good story. Right?
Oh, very true. Now there was a testimonial story which I heard, which again I find fascinating, of a fishing boat running the shorelines of southern Alaska and saw a grizzly just scampering along the shorelines, but it was towards dusk at sundown, walking along the shorelines, and it had stopped. And now, mind you, with fishermen seeing grizzlies up there is like us seeing squirrels. You see them, but you don't make this big notation of it because it is such a common sight.
Unlike we
But
would.
But the fishermen noticed that the grizzly immediately got startled and took off running at full speed across the shoreline until it was out of sight when a bipedal creature stepped out of the woods. And he watched this bipedal creature go down to the water and do what it had to do. So with that witness testimony, it seems to me that either a grizzly or Kodiak even has wariness against something that was walking on two legs.
Look, I'm not saying Nantinaq isn't a thing.
Right.
I'm saying that,
Nor am I.
because I think both of us, or all of us, the fact that we host a show about Bigfoot, kind of leads you all to believe. We have some level of belief in the existence, right? To us, though, when you start making the outrageous claims, sometimes that hurts what we try to believe and what we try to protect. And, one of the things I always get concerned with as these things start getting more popular and culture, right? Pop culture, now all of a sudden they become a money-making opportunity. And now you have to start worrying that these places that might have been pure are going to get corrupted now. And everybody and their brother is going to be going to Alaska. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing because, Small Town Monsters is going to Alaska this year. They're going to be doing On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Last Frontier, right? Which I'm sure will be a lot better than what we're getting from Discovery.
Right.
I hope. I have a lot of faith in Seth and the team. They've not disappointed me yet.
Right.
Don't imagine they're going to. But that becomes part of the problem. Everybody and their brother go up there. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to have questions as to the validity of any kind of evidence you get. Even people that live locally that could start hoaxing. Thankfully, there's researchers out there like, Larry Baxter.
Beans.
Beans, Larry Beans
Right.
Baxter, right? And you can go check out In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man right now on YouTube. It's available for free. Stephen Major and Larry Beans Baxter and team put that out for people. It's an enjoyable documentary. If you're expecting it to be a shock and awe, you're going to be disappointed. It's not a shock and awe style documentary. It's really a I kind of consider it a nature documentary, to be honest with you. It's a good research, a guide in reality to what research is really like. And it explores the mystery and mythos of Port Chatham, which story very similar to Portlock.
Right.
This Portlock's a little bit more deadly. You know, you see a lot more in Port Chatham. It's people disappearing. In Portlock, it's people disappearing, and then you find them dismembered in the lagoon.
Right.
You know, a big difference, right? Similar story, two different endings, folks.
So let me ask you a question, Sean.
Yeah.
You know, watching this stuff, and I've seen a few different documentaries on the area, and you're looking at the old cannery area. The fish were coming in, they were catching the fish, they were canning them right there. It seemed very profitable. Why did all this end suddenly? And so much of the equipment has been left behind, and it's still there today. Now, iron within itself has a great recycling factor. You can retrieve so much of that equipment off the shorelines, get it onto a ship, and have it recycled, because now you don't have to purify it. It goes right to a foundry and just gets reheated and repurposed into other iron materials. It still sits there.
Well, put yourself
yeah, go ahead.
Put yourself in this mentality, because we're thinking differently, because we've had exposure to science fiction and horror stories that just didn't exist really,
right,
like they did there in the 40s and 50s,
right.
So now you have kind of a mass hysteria. Things like if War of the Worlds were to happen today on the radio, none of us would give a shit, because whatever, right? Look what happened when they ran that.
Oh,
now you take that same thing in Alaska, in a small community, small fishing community. People are popping up, dying. You're finding dismembered bodies. You're afraid to go out of your home because something's out there is going to kill you. If you go out when it's foggy, and guess what? You live in the Bay, so every day's freaking foggy. So every day you're just serving your family up as a hot lunch to the potential Nantinaq, right? So yeah, everybody and their brother is going to leave, because this is going to sound terrible. It's not that critical thought didn't exist. It's they had no frame of reference. They had no real, besides these stories that have been passed down for Nantinaq, right? They have no reference material to go and research. Now, it's a different world we live in. We have information at our fingertips. They didn't have that. So that potential of scaring the hell out of each other, that could be why they left.
Yeah, like the domino effect. Well, Joe and Nancy left. I think I'm going to leave too.
Yeah.
And then, I leave too. And then the next two people, Mary Jo and Al say, well, they all left. I think we need to get out of here too, because clearly something's going on. And before you know it, it seems like an overnight process that these areas went completely extinct and just left everything behind. And it is a fascinating mystery as to what happened, at Portlock and Port Chatham more specifically, but it is extreme because the fish didn't go away. The fish were still there. The whole canning process would have still been very active in that area. So something lit the wick to create everybody to just bail out and get the hell out of there. And is it possibly a bipedal hair-covered creature? Yeah, I think that's in a great possibility that may have happened.
I think it plays to it. Go ahead, Big.
And it had to be something that affected the community directly, because you think about it, as you said, there was all this equipment, there was houses, there were things left behind. The fact that nobody, like a scrapper or somebody that was like, hey, I go over to Bob. Bob doesn't live there anymore. We could just camp out there for a couple of years till, somebody, till I catch up on my bills and stuff. Nobody went near it. So it wasn't just that they all left. It was the fact is that the aura of the place basically told somebody, hey, don't cross the bridge. Don't get on the boat and go over there. Don't whatever, just let it be, because the last guy who went there just didn't seem to come back right.
But to your point, though, you talk about how neighbor Bob, left. maybe neighbor Bob didn't leave. Maybe neighbor Bob died. You're talking about a very small community of like 40 people or, not a lot of people.
Yeah, but
so,
there was quite a number of people that ended up missing that were never recovered. And then there were bodies that were found of other people in the lagoon, like you mentioned, Sean, that were completely torn apart.
And I'm sure it had its transits and everything else that came through, people looking for a day's work or whatnot, or, following the fishing and kind of like Alaska has now. But, as a community as a whole, not a very large sized community, one person goes missing or one person winds up dead. That's a bigger impact than you have a lot more close connection to that person than if you lived in our town where you've got 40,000 people or in your town, Vance, where you've got maybe 1 million people in the suburbs in the city alone, that connection point's a little different. And as you talk about, I mentioned just a little bit ago, not having anything of substance to back this up with, and you're fighting against this mythos, that mythos is going to win every time because that's what makes sense. So now you have the whole situation of town abandonment. But before we press on, we do have to go to lunch.
Yes, it's lunchtime. Hey, peanut butter joey.
We have to. I'm gonna go. I don't know. I quit. We'll go to the news.
No, you don't.
Millions of Americans suffer from cryptid lacusitis, a condition that results from financial loss on undeveloped wilderness with no cryptid experience. But now there's a possible cure. SE Joyous, the once-a-week dosage that may reduce cryptid lacusitis. Clinical studies show after 6 weeks on SE Joyous, patients felt satisfied and more knowledgeable on where to look. The patented ingredients in SE Joyous fire brain neurons and stimulate thoughts as experienced by experts. Don't take SE Joyous with sugary donuts or if you have athlete's foot. Possible side effects are shoelace tripping, excessive earwax buildup, repeating phrases like "did you hear that?", excessive wood knocking, sunspots, and solar flares. So move on with your life and get past cryptid lacusitis with once weekly SE Joyous. Ask your doctor for more information and visit our website at sasquatchexperience.com. See our ad in Seuss magazine. Redfoot, Bluefoot, Bigfoot, Nofoot. SE Joyous is a product of Oma Media. Keeping our feet close to the fire. Why? Well, 'cause it's cold out. This is the Sasquatch Experience, stranger than fiction, news, and stories. And let's get into an article that was published 3 days ago at livescience.com. It's an article that's written as if all of us have lived under a rock for thousands of years regarding the Bigfoot. Seriously, I've yet to come across anybody that does not know Sasquatch or Bigfoot and say, I don't know what that is. I have no clue. I've never heard of such a thing. No, that doesn't exist. But this article is going to go on to tell us as if we are in the 3rd grade. So it starts off by stating, Bigfoot or Sasquatch is a giant ape-like creature that some people believe roam North America and is a cryptid or a species rumored to exist, just like the Chupacabra or Loch Ness Monster. See what I mean? Okay, no, never heard of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but I have heard of El Chupacabra. So the article goes on by stating, there's scant physical evidence to suggest Bigfoot is actually out there, but that doesn't stop alleged sightings of the ape that never shows its face, or Bigfoot buffs from trying to prove there's life in the legend. Most Bigfoot sightings occur in the Northwest. Of where? Where the creature can be linked to indigenous myths and legends. The word Sasquatch is derived from Sasquatch, language used by some Salish First Nations people in southwestern British Columbia, according to the Oregon Encyclopedia, and the word means wild man or hairy man. There have been more than 10,000 eyewitness accounts of Bigfoot in the continental United States in the last 50 years, according to Live Science back in 2019. In these accounts, Bigfoot is usually described at about being 8 to 10 feet tall and covered in hair. Sasquatch book author, and notice we don't give the name of the book, John Green, compiled a list of 1,340 sightings through the 19th and 20th centuries, but the modern Bigfoot or Sasquatch myth gained new life in the 1950s. See, this is how journalism works these days. The footprints discovered near Bluff Creek were a prank by a man called Ray Wallace. His children revealed after his death in 2002, according to Smithsonian Magazine. By that time, though, Bigfoot was firmly established in popular culture across the continent. Since the 1958 article was published, a wealth of other claims have been made about Sasquatch tracks, casts, photos, videos, and other evidence. Eyewitness reports or sightings are the most common evidence put forward for the existence of Bigfoot. Unfortunately, these are based on human memories, and memories are not reliable. In crime cases, for example, witnesses can be influenced by their emotions and may miss or distort important details. In the same vein, people often overestimate their ability to remember things when it comes to cryptids like Bigfoot. The human brain is capable of making up explanations for events it can't immediately interpret. And then many people simply want to believe they exist. Me. The most famous Bigfoot video, the PG film, and of course it doesn't call it the PG film, but we all know what we're talking about, shot at Bluff Creek. The video shows what appears to be a large hairy bipedal ape or Bigfoot striding through a clearing. The video's authenticity is still debated, but it was likely a hoax. This is what the article says, was likely a hoax, with an ape-like figure, just a human, wearing a costume. See, to me, that's just another example of journalistic malpractice. Thanks again for listening to the Sasquatch Experience, Stranger Than Fiction News and Stories. Back to the gentleman and the interesting things in which we discuss.
Thanks, Vance.
It's what
S.E. Joyous, huh?
S.E. Joyous.
You should bottle and sell the shit out of that, let me tell you. How about it? Thanks for that.
Cryptoblackicitis.
The author of that last article sounded like a dick.
Kind of, which is why I brought it up, and thanks for mentioning that, Henry. I appreciate that because, you know, they're interjecting their just personal thought, and that's it. That's the cube in which they stay in. That's their little box. It's a safety zone. And we'll just say it's a hoax, most likely a hoax, and okay, end it at that. Well, you know what? Shut it, because there's way too much to that video, and we're not going to get into the whole PG thing because we're working up north in Portlock and Port Chatham. And the Nantinaq.
The Nantinaq. And, folks, if you're just tuning in, why? The show's halfway over. Shame on you. Anyhow, Sasquatch Experience, you can find us on social media. Yes, we're socially active. Sasquatch Experience on Facebook, Instagram, and Squatch EXP on Twitter. Seek us out. Connect with us. We want to know more about you. Leave it at that. Also, for those of us who care to support the show, Sasquatch Experience, of course, is supported from viewers like you for as little as $2 a month. James wanted to do that. We just had to, and he at least it's not the bottle of wine this week. He's normally just this weird.
Oh, this is James being normal, huh?
Could be.
Okay.
It depends on his medicine.
The wine actually evens me out.
That's a scary thought. For as little as $2 a month, you can support Sasquatch Experience. Get access to each show ad-free, as well as exclusive watch-alongs, as we've done Primal Rage and Exist so far. If you are thin-skinned, do not watch them. They're a little racy. We add some more adult commentary to it than you're
very colorful with.
Yeah, very colorful watch-alongs. And, of course, early access to the classic episodes and special interviews, so on and so forth, that you get by being a member. Starting for as little, guys, for how much? $2. $2 a month, as Alex says, should be able to pay for all our electric bills. Yes, because we don't live in Alaska, so our energy is actually cheaper, Alex. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, Vance, I told you kind of embarrassingly that as we were going through these stories, it was real easy for me to keep getting mistaken between Portlock and Port Chatham.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have two very similar locations, very similar stories. But I don't know. Port Chatham's just a little different. It doesn't seem to have that, I don't know, to me, and I could be wrong, doesn't seem to have that kind of scary overtone. Like, it's still some scary things happen there, but it just didn't seem to be as dramatic as Portlock.
Well, it's interesting because I know there's a lot of focus on Portlock, and a lot of the natives in the area clearly stated that that area was haunted. Now, a lot of the settlers that worked the fishing and the cannery actually came over from Russia, which, is a very short trip from Siberia and crossing into Alaska. And so there were a lot of Russian settlers and European settlers there too. But it was the natives of the area that claimed that area was very haunted, and still to this very day, since the 1950s, when all this happened in those two locations, still to this day, it is considered the most haunted part of Alaska. So clearly there's something going on there that we don't quite understand yet. And maybe it's something as simple as, a Bigfoot community that might be living there. Now, we all know that in the wildlife and biological studies of wildlife, there are rogue animals that act outside the boundaries of behavior in which they are studied. And I'm talking, lions, tigers, alligators. There are those that are exceptionally rogue and do behaviors that are unsubstantial to what the general populace of that type of species is. And we may be faced with something very similar to what happened in both of those areas, but in Portlock, it could very well be a very rogue, very angry, very DNA embedded, bad attitude type of bipedal creature that lives there. We still don't know, but it's things to put into the category of, okay, we need to protect ourselves if we're going to go into that area and research. Oh, we're going to get hit by a train, aren't we?
I hit the mute button for him. I was prepared for that.
It's a train wreck.
Yeah.
Look at Bake.
If he'd do as much homework as he did in, his antics.
That's okay.
Poor Vance.
No, that's okay.
Hey,
But
I
my
watched the
point
video.
is that there is rogue animals in a lot of the species, right down to small species, even in fish and reptiles that are rogue, that act a little bit differently than the entire species genome. And they kind of step outside of those boundaries, and that
An aberration.
may very well be right. And that may very well be what's happened up in that area. And of course, when you experience it for yourself at that time in real time, you may inflate the experience to make it a little bit more supernatural than what the facts will actually lay out before you.
Yeah. I mean, what you say has a lot of weight and a lot of merit to, what we're discussing. My fear, though, is that, I don't know, it's a little dramatic, right? It's a little dramatic to blame it on one rogue. Boy,
It's
I just
very
went through the litany
dramatic,
there.
right? Oh. And this
Sorry
has been
for the
going on for
sorry.
years. I mean, at least from the 1950s, when the evacuation of the area seemed to have happened, right up through the 70s, there were still reports of, at least a couple of these beings in the area that were very aggressive. So who's to say? Maybe it's, sacred land to them and they didn't want anybody to be there. That's very possible too. If it's a bipedal creature that shares any kind of DNA or any kind of intelligence that we do with opposable thumbs, maybe this is their church We don't know. We have no idea. And here come these invaders into their area. They want them out of there. And what's the best way to get them out? But through aggression.
You know, I think with Port Chatham, though, the thing that kind of gives me more leanings to it being Sasquatch as opposed to something supernatural is the sightings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are more sighting reports. Larry Baxter, you know, of course, puts them in his book and kind of, you know, does the legwork for you on that. You get a chance to get a copy of the book by Larry Beans Baxter. Mm-hmm. To me, that's I don't know. There's just a little bit more something concrete and solid to follow, as the sighting reports are a little different than what they're saying in Portlock. You know, again, you go to 8-foot tall, large claws, and in Portlock, you know, or Port Chatham, you have real sightings. I think the one that stands out to me is, was it by the logger, and he sees the Bigfoot actually off, and he has this like experience with it. I'd have to get the book out. I feel like an idiot at the moment.
But yeah, that sounds very familiar, right?
We just talked about it on the last episode we had with Larry, and I'll try to pull it up here. I have my Kindle right in front of me.
Ooh, no, but that definitely sounds familiar to me, at least with that aspect. I don't know. Again, I keep going back to this may just be and I got to be careful. I'm going to put air quotes up. Typical Sasquatch activity. I don't know that it is actually something in a supernatural realm, even though this is yet a species to be discovered. We're only assuming that this is the real thing as far as a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or, you know, Nantinaq or Nantinaq, whatever. Nantinaq.
It gets hard
I'll
for
never
you to
get
say
it right
after a while.
because, yeah, you know, there's so many different spellings of it too. Yeah, Nantiqua. And well, Nantiqua is somebody I went to school with, and you know, she was dating. Never mind.
And so,
I know we totally derailed there after that
as the
train
world
ran
turns,
into
right
Baker. Right.
Isn't that Port Charles?
It is Port Charles, and I live in St. Charles, so we're right down the road from each other. But nonetheless, you know, I'm still thinking that I think a lot of the possibility of the activity that happened in both of those spots would have been something that we have not scientifically acknowledged, but to be a Bigfoot. The only thing that keeps throwing me off back against the wall is that there's a lot of testimonial eyewitness accounts from the native region, not from the European or Russian settlement, but from the native culture that was there, that this is an 8-foot tall creature that had claws. That's the only thing that keeps throwing me off balance here.
Yeah, the claws.
Yeah, same
right?
here.
So,
the claws. Yeah. Well, why? But why would somebody make up a story about something having claws, though?
No, exactly. Which is the only reason why I brought up the Kodiak bear and the short-faced bear. Again, there's been a number of sightings of those that have definitely claimed that they have seen what they believe is a short-faced bear.
Yeah, and that's pretty good legwork on your part, Vance, to kind of sort that out for us, because it fits the bill.
Right. No, it definitely
probably
does.
more plausible
And,
than a Bigfoot.
Well, again, I'll just reestablish what I said earlier. The short-faced bear is called that for one reason, because the snout was so much more stubbier to the eyes than bears that exist now, like a polar or any of the brown bear species, being brown bear, grizzly, or Kodiak. Its snout was much shorter. And if you get that thing to stand up on its hind legs, which they do when they're in an aggressive attack mode, you see claws and you see a short, stubby face. It could very well be something that we thought went extinct, just like I said, and you brought up too, 11,000 years ago, this was thought to have gone extinct. just like we did a show a long time ago about the megalodon. Is this thing actually extinct? We don't know this. We're talking too expansive an area to know for sure. But then again, we're talking this short-faced bear and Gigantopithecus going extinct within the same relative time span. It's possible that the two still exist. It's very possible. And I'm not saying Bigfoot is Gigantopithecus, because over 10,000 year period of time, evolution would still have been evolving. So then maybe Gigantopithecus has evolved 10,000 years into what we know it is now. And again, you know, I can go on for hours over this whole subject. It drives me nuts when people say, well, it's very possible that Gigantopithecus crossed the land bridge from, you know, China into America. Why? Why would have this creature only have existed in the China region? Why would have it not existed in the North American continent to begin with? We all reflect back to, well, you know, we found this fossil tooth and jawbone in China, so that must be the cradle of life for Gigantopithecus.
But now think about
this. You know, in the northern territories of, you know, the North American continent, which is greatly forest land, things get absolved in forest lands with no trace.
Yeah, so but the reason
it existed here,
I think the reason the fixation happens on the Gigantopithecus originating from China, and think about this, is how close is that to proximity to Sri Lanka, where the orangutans are, right? And like that area is kind of conducive to that type of ape. Orangutan, Gigantopithecus kind of share similar, you know, features, right? Gigantopithecus to me looks more like orangutan than it does a gorilla.
Right.
Right. So that in itself probably why they place the origin of that species there in China. But to your point, I don't think it was exclusive to China. We've only had a few fossils to go off of for Gigantopithecus. We've not had a full skeleton of Gigantopithecus found, knock on wood for whatever that's worth, because maybe we have. And like you said, things just don't last that long in the forest land. It just doesn't happen.
Right. But we also have to give inclusion to the fact that evolution continues. So 10,000 years ago to today, things would have evolved as far as shape, muscular structure, a body type for that environment. And my whole point was, it drove me nuts to say, well, these creatures only lived in China and they must have crossed the land bridge into North America. Why? What makes China so special that North America is not special for a creature to develop here? Nothing.
Well, the reality is,
you know, we're still talking the same latitude and longitude. So
humanity.
I think things could have developed in Canada and in the North American continent that could have been a bipedal creature, maybe similar to Gigantopithecus, but maybe a little bit different. And then over 10,000 years, evolution would have changed its muscular structure, and still to what we know today is what we see in the Patty film.
Well, I think 10,000 years is a short time for that type of evolution.
It's very short. Yeah,
but you were talking about 200,000 years ago to now. That's a little bit longer in the, you know, in the DNA soup for things to start getting rearranged, right? And, you know, maybe that's a little bit more plausible and likely. You go into chapter 15 of Abandoned: The History and Horror of Port Chatham. Larry Baxter goes into, you know, chapter 17, more sightings on the Kenai Peninsula. Because, you know, we talked about one of the problems I had going into this, when you look on just a regular like BFRO database on the Kenai Peninsula, there's not a lot of Bigfoot sightings listed. You go into Larry's book, that's a different story. Now, they're very close abstracts, right? 1974, sighting, tracks, and vocals involving a lost snow machiner. 77, tracks discovered. 1980s on Sick Lake Road, a hunter described seeing a 6 to 7 foot tall hairy man walk across the road. The figure stopped, looked at him, and continued across the road. The man loaded his shotgun and promptly left the area. So a sighting like that's different, right? That obviously you have some momentary connection where you're looking at this thing and it's looking back at you, and you get that instinct to load your shotgun.
Right.
That's a little bit different than, creatures in the fog out there looking around that are going to, kill you and then murderize you and throw your remains in the lagoon.
Right. Right.
But that's how this stuff always stops. That's how this stuff always starts, right?
But
and I'm not saying inherently it's wrong. It's just that's what was done.
Right. But isn't it interesting that how through time and documentations of all of this, so much of this happened in between the 50s and the 70s.
Well,
and I understand there was no internet at the time. I get that. And, and there were a lot more people that were not distracted by handheld devices. But, it seems to me that, there's just this plethora of reports between that time frame, between the 50s and the 70s, even into the 80s. But, it kind of fades out a little bit through the 80s. But, the reports are absolutely creepy and stunning and terrifying. You throw everything into one bag in that time frame. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of mind-blowing. You'd like to time machine and go back to some of these areas and see, what actually happened. I know we all want to do that, and that's why, our listeners are listening, because they would like to have answers too, as to fact or fiction.
Could people see a bear and mistake it for Bigfoot and tell people I saw a Bigfoot just to get people excited about Sasquatch? Yeah, absolutely. And I think it happens.
Yep, I do too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it happens.
That was from Alex Stewart, our good listener who actually lives up in Alaska.
Yes, thanks, Alex. And I will say, when the last time I was up in Canada, in Ontario, we were out on the boat running up on Eagle Lake, and you'd see the bears along the shoreline. It got to the point where you just, okay, like I said earlier, it's like almost like seeing squirrels here. Okay, you see it, but you really don't pay much attention to it. After the third or fourth day there, seeing black bears running along the shoreline, you just kind of phase it off of, it's okay, again, it's a black bear, not a big deal. So you see something along the shoreline, you may not even think to take a good look at it. I don't know. And maybe it is a bipedal creature. Who's to say? But I think that there's some people that probably go up there, they see a bear, and they want to fantasize it more than what it actually is. I think there's been a lot of cases of that.
I completely agree with you. Mm-hmm. Henry Baker, any final thoughts on this subject tonight?
Well, I think the mystery will always have this mystery. Well, I don't think we'll ever actually really know exactly why those people abandoned that town.
All right.
JB, any thoughts?
Well, I think until you actually explore, like somebody actually starts living there and doing things like that, you might get a better idea what goes on. I've kind of learned, and I kind of put this on some of the forums, is I bought some land, and I've learned so much about the natural things around me from just little things. Like I put some corn scraps out, and now I notice deer tracks, and I notice bird sign and all kinds of things that honestly, before I had the land, I had no clue what that was. And I think like people from Alaska need to kind of look at it and go, okay, well, this has got to be this because that's what's in my backyard and things like that. So I think that until someone's out there on a regular basis, I don't think you're going to get a really good answer, or another attack happens. Mm-hmm. And then you can kind of hone in and go, okay, this was not a crazed bear. This was a blah, blah, blah that's still alive. Yeah, we can send Henry.
All right. Right.
We could, hey, Henry, you're all good to be DiCaprio'd, right?
And I knew it would only take a short amount of time
No
for that
kidding.
to
Get an
happen.
Oscar.
No kidding. No
How about
kidding. Yeah.
Well, it's been a great show tonight, guys. Thanks for everybody tuning in and spending some time with us. So we talked about Nantinaq and what it could be, what it may be, what we think it is. I think we had some good overview here. We could have went a little bit more in depth in things, but we got an hour, and we could spend more time, and we will be revisiting this through Season 5, farther north. Good show tonight, guys. Thanks for jumping in and having a little fun with us. It was good to have all four of us on the show for a decent amount of time. How about that, right? Everyone made it tonight. Only lost Vance for a second. That's
That was
okay.
my fault.
Second.
Yeah.
Folks, find us, SasquatchExperience.com. Listen to us on Spotify, rate and review. And just thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in to us each and every week. We appreciate it. We'll be back next week. Stay tuned to the social media for an announcement of what that show is going to be. Henry, give them those beautiful words before I roll that beautiful bean footage.
Y'all be good or be good at it.
We'll see you next week, folks.
You've been listening to Sasquatch Experience. Please rate and review wherever this podcast is consumed. To share your experience, visit us on Facebook or email us, squatchexperience@gmail.com. Keep on squatching.